Hi everyone. We're going to be presenting some preliminary findings based on the field-based biodiversity study plots at Parc National de Mont Mégantic. Okay, there we go. Okay, so plant biodiversity assessments are commonly carried out by ecologists who establish survey plots in which the plant community is then quantified. Using collection of survey plots, we can then ask ecological questions related at local, regional, or even global scales. While these field-based methods provide really high resolution biological data, they are limited to small spatial coverage, are modest in sample size, and commonly occur at one spatial grain. So when we contrast this to hyperspectral imaging, hyperspectral imaging potentially can overcome some of these limitations, creating wall-to-wall imaging products. However, before we apply these hyperspectral data to community ecology questions, it's important to know how the spectral data relates to biodiversity dimensions quantified by field-based approaches. However, for this talk, we're going to be focused on the field-based data, presenting both the methodology and then some preliminary trends we've seen at Mont Mégantic. When investigating biodiversity, we are interested both in the diversity within communities, but also the compositional differences between communities. So as a quick example here, we can see these two communities are very similar in diversity. However, because they share no species in common, compositionally, they are very different. So the data that we're working on is from the two forest sites, Mont Saint Bruno and also Mont Mégantic in southern Quebec. At Mont Mégantic, the forest vegetation transitions from a deciduous temperate forest at low elevation to boreal forest at high elevation. And the Mont Saint Bruno site effectively acts to extend the lower limit of the elevational gradient, capturing additional, more southern species. Together, the vegetation is representative of the vegetation occurring across southern Quebec. In addition to the elevation gradient, there is a land use gradient. There's been a long history of logging at Parc National, or before it was a protected park at Mont Mégantic, with large areas of the park getting logged in the 60s. So in the field, we established forest inventory plots systematically to maximize the number of unique species assemblages, to span the gradient of interest, and then also to occur across the spatial extent of the imaged area. Over the past 2 summers, we've completed 50 plots at Mont Mégantic and 15 plots at Mont Saint Bruno. All trees in the crown classes dominant, codominant, and intermediate, which I'll define later, were quantified, as well as suppressed trees greater than 9 centimeters. So in relation to the plot center, we obtained an XY position of each trunk. The species was identified and the diameter breast height was quantified. So we together, after doing that for all the trees, we have a map of all the tree trunks. However, we were also interested in the vertical structure of the community. Each individual, the height was measured. They were assigned a canopy class where dominant trees were extended into the canopy and were clearly visible and taller than other ones, their surrounding neighbors. Codominant trees also extended into the canopy. However, they were not the tallest individuals present. And then we have 2 crown classes that were below the canopy, intermediate trees, and then very short suppressed trees. In addition to canopy class, we quantified canopy area and the orientation. To do so, we measured the length of the longest axes of the crown canopy. We then measured the length to the trunk, so we could position the canopies in relation to the XY positions we obtained earlier. And then we took the perpendicular measurement. So taken together, the crown canopies can be modeled as ellipses. And because we measured the orientation in relation to the trunk, we can then map the canopies of each forest inventory plot. This forest inventory data can be used to examine the taxonomic dimension of biodiversity. And by combining the forest inventory data with the leaf functional traits that were obtained by the UDM field crew, we can use this data to examine the functional dimension. And in the future, as we alluded to in our introduction, these dimensions, we're going to look at the relationship with the spectral dimension of biodiversity. Essentially, within these data matrices, species is species abundance or trait value weighted species abundance. And so we were curious on what species abundant metric best corresponds to the aerial hyperspectral data.
Yeah, and we suggest that the best relation is to be found when we derive the tree crown areas as seen from above from the sensor. And therefore, we applied two different filters to get rid of the overlapping tree crowns. We first applied the tree crown class. So we cut all different classes by their overlay class. So the codominant species were cut by the dominant ones, the intermediate crowns were cut by the dissolved polygons of the codominant and dominant ones, and so on. And secondly, we got rid of the overlaps within each crown class. Therefore, we applied the tree height. We did this, what you also see here on the right side, bottom right. And we did this two-step approach because a lower tree could also overlap a higher tree defined as dominant one if there is a high slope, for example, as Anna already mentioned. And with this information, we could relate the crown areas with the corresponding species and derive the proportional crown area for each species per plot. And we use these measures as the abundance, the species abundance, to calculate Shannon diversity, but also community-weighted mean trait values. But we questioned whether these area-weighted diversity measures and traits are still related to the diversity of the whole tree community. And therefore, we correlated the area-weighted Shannon diversity against the Shannon diversity using tree individuals as abundance of the whole community, but also of the different tree crown layers. And overall, we found very high correlations among these types of Shannon diversity. And we suggest that it is valid that the area-weighted Shannon diversity is still related to the whole tree community. And I want to give you just a very short insight into our preliminary trends of these field-based data. We used the area-weighted and as well area-weighted Shannon diversity, but also the area-weighted community-weighted traits, and related these to environmental variables. On the one hand, we used elevation and slope here, but found no strong linear relationship. And I want to also to pinpoint to a very known relationship here between the specific leaf area and the NDVI, which was really strong here and also found in various literatures. Yeah, and Anna wanted to give you a short insight also on the ordination with the topography.
Yep, so similar to the findings from the diversity when we did a constrained ordination of the species composition, we can see that we have two environmental variables strongly explaining the dissimilarity elevation as well as slope. So this matches the nonlinear trends in Christine's data. And so we're very curious about, I mean, it's commonly considered elevation is the main control on the species turnover. So we're interested in examining this further. And then just as an example here, we can do a similar analysis using functional composition. This is only with 4 traits and mostly related to the difference between coniferous needles and broad leaves, but also the 2 strongest explanatory environmental variables were, again, this slope and elevation. Moving forward, we're going to examine the relationship between the biodiversity dimensions, so seeing how spectral diversity and composition relates to taxonomic and functional diversity and composition. And then using insights from these relationships between the biodiversity dimensions, we're going to apply community assembly theory to spectral data to further examine the environmental controls on the forest at Mont Mégantic. Wonderful, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Anna and Christine. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand or type it in the chat. And co-hosts don't have the ability to raise their hand, so you can just ask for the right to ask question in the chat. So Anna Schweiger has a question. Question regarding the abundance. Okay, go Anna.
Okay, sorry. Hello, Christine. Hi, everyone. I have a question regarding the abundance weighing per height you guys used. I might not have, got that fully during the presentation, but is it right that you used 3 height classes to?
Yeah, no. We did, or Anna, not me, did 2 different measurements. She defined the tree crown class for each species. So, or you can also like the one seen from the field, which was obviously the overlapping crown area would be defined as the dominant one, and so on, like for the codominant ones, which are partly overlapped, the intermediate, which are more overlapped, but still might be available for from above. And then the tree height is a different measurement. So these were separated from each other because the tree height is more, could be like there could be errors using just the tree height because along a high slope gradient, for example, we could have like with a high slope, we could have a higher tree which is still overlapped by a lower tree standing like up on the hill, and therefore we applied this 2-fold procedure. Is it understandable?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, so you could have 2 dominant trees that are standing next to each other. Both have large crowns, and they could, in theory, overlap somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah.
But their area is. Do you subtract the overlap of those 2 in the dominant?
In that
class?
case, the tree height is. So if we have like 2 dominant trees together, we use the tree height, and we had not the case. Luckily, we had not the case that they had the same tree height in that case. So, and there need to be just like that. We, if we use more data, we would probably need to use more filters, like accounting for the overlaps, like sharing the overlapping areas if there are like 2 dominant trees, next to each other, overlapping and having the same tree heights, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when they differ in height, you subtract the overlap from the smaller one.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Cool work, great data collection, and yeah, I'm excited to see more. Very nice.